You refer to them as St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Paul, St. Peter, because they either knew Jesus or were very interested in writing about him. And then as the church grew, some extraordinary individuals came along and did very extraordinary things in church life to advance the church, and reputedly even performed some miracles. And as time went on, the church even invented new rules and regulations to help us identify the new saints in the church that emerged. But in our branch of Christianity, we don't need help in finding and seeing and recognizing saints, because we have all experienced them in our lives. I think our first understanding of what sainthood is our grandparents. We love to go to Grandma's house. They always love to see us, and they just love us. And I'm so glad you came over today, because you get to help Grandma make cookies. And Granddad's going to take you on a walk later in the park. And there won't be any chores. Chores are back at home, not here. And there probably won't be any discipline, because none of us want to do anything wrong to upset our grandparents. The second type of saint, I think, is somebody that is in all of our educational background. If you look back, there is at least one teacher that was a solid influence on your life. Somebody who helped you make it through the difficulties of learning a particular subject. Some teacher who showed and helped you to discover your own gifts, your own talents, your own potentials for life, and made you feel proud to be who you are. And might have even pointed the way to where your life's path will lead you. And then, of course, there are the members of the church. Church members who not only taught you the faith and taught you the Christian lifestyle that emerges from that faith, but when you think back about them, they also seem to exemplify a particular virtue. You think of them, that person was the epitome of graciousness, or was always truthful and honest, or some other kind of attribute. Well, you can see where I'm going, but let me say first, all churches have saints, and probably many of them. And in this church, definitely Mary Mahar was one of our many saints. Mary had a lifelong devotion and love for the church. And she was always involved for decades in the work and planning and attending the various activities in countless bazaars, style shows, luncheons, boards and committees, Sunday school programs, winter coat drives, packing Thanksgiving baskets, even mural painting. She was a very weekly attendee of the Bible study group. And there you could see exhibited her very discerning mind with very discerning questions. She had a sharp, intelligent mind. And the group would meet at various times at Mary's house. And you would think, oh, we're going to go and study the Bible at Mary's house. But oh, we're not done. Mary would always serve an elegant meal. And then it's time to go home. Oh, no. Stay a little longer, because we're going to have fun too. And she would come up with a fun activity like playing a game. That's Mary. She reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha in the Bible. I think you can recall that. Jesus in his last days comes to their house. And right away, that Mary sits down with Jesus in the living room and begins getting into some deep conversation about life and covenant relationship with God and whatever they talked about. And Martha's in the back trying to set the table and get things ready and starts griping. Why isn't Mary back here helping me? And she gripes to Jesus for Jesus to push Mary to come back and join her. Of course, Jesus says she's doing what is best for her right now, and that is being with me. I think of our Mary as being both Mary and Martha. Mary would have been the type to be with Jesus in that front room, asking all kinds of discerning questions, and then very intently listening to see what Jesus has to say. But also, before Jesus ever arrived at their home, Mary, now playing the role of Martha, would have had everything in readiness before Jesus even arrived at the door, and it would have been in excellence. She was an elegant person. Her family spurned 4 generations of baptisms, confirmations, weddings, funerals. 6 of her 10 grandchildren who were born here in Moline were all raised and confirmed here in this church. And she was quite happy to see that she was an influence, that her daughters carried on in being a part of the church, being involved in the planning and implementation and organization of events and activities here in our congregation. All churches have their saints, and Mary Mahar was truly one of our many. And we have come today to remember, to pay tribute, and to thank her for her love and her work. But I say this also because a true saint is someone who inspires those around him or her. A true saint inspires all the rest of us to show and shows us how we too can be at our own best in walking the path of Christ and by serving the needs of others. May God bless Mary Mahar. Rest well, Mary, because I'm sure in heaven there are some jobs waiting for you to get the angels organized and enhancing their work on earth with us. Amen.
It's an honor to be here today with Mary's family and all of her friends. You know, for a long time, I really didn't like Mary. I thought she was bossy. So I just avoided her. We had a mutual friend, Donna Larson, who lived upriver from us in Cordova. I thought if Donna and Mary were friends, then it must be me. Cork and Mary were part of Dick and Donna's Gourmet Club that met for over 50 years. Donna, in her 80s, got pancreatic cancer. Every afternoon, about 4, I would hop on my bike and ride up to check on her. Toward the end, I asked her, "When you get to heaven, would it be okay if I had a few of your friends down on our dock for lunch and we could celebrate you?" "Oh," she said, "I'd love that. I'll be there." I called Mary first. "A dock lunch? That's a great idea. How can I help you?" After the sit-down lunch with linens and silver, china, stories and laughter, and a few tears, I brought the guests up from the river in our old golf cart. Mary's parting words: "Thanks, Sonny, for the first annual Donna Dock lunch." We had 5 more lunches During that time, I began to know Mary. I learned when Mary entertained, she began with the centerpiece. I learned that she and Cork danced in the kitchen. They loved having family and friends around their table. Mary relished going to estate sales and collecting china and silver and from notable people in the area. Her home was full of one-of-a-kind treasures, and she knew exactly where to put them. There was an oil painting that covered an entire wall that she created from a scene she remembered in France when she took a cooking class in Julia Child's kitchen. There was a buffet that Mary oil painted to look like an old building in Europe. Last year, I called Mary. Would you come to a slumber party at our cabin? Come at 6 for dinner in your pajamas. I don't wear pajamas. I wear a nightgown. That's fine. Wear your nightgown. We will have dinner, spend the night, and go home after breakfast. During the course of the evening, each guest is to entertain us in some small way with a talent. Oh, I'd love to come. I have ballet shoes and I have tap shoes. Mary arrived in her nightgown with a fresh green salad with homemade dressing. After dinner, the entertainment began. Mary changed her mind. Instead of tap and ballet shoes, she brought a book she had created for her grandson. This little book had photos and stories, pictures, poetry, wit, all bound together as only Mary could do it. After breakfast the next morning, our group presented Mary with a necklace. She was voted queen of the slumber party. Since that time, Mary sold her home. She went through her treasures and dispersed where she could. I have something for you, she said. In her country French cupboard was a silver compote on legs. This was my mother's. She always kept an African violet in it in an east window. Last year, about this time, Mary called me. I'd like to have a birthday lunch for you. I'm asking each guest to bring a favorite gift they received in their lifetime and tell the story. I brought the silver compote that sits in our east window by the kitchen sink. Mary moved from her home with grace. It wasn't easy, but she did it her way. Her new home was decorated with the huge oil painting in the dining room. The hand-painted buffet graced her living room. There were many treasures. It was beautiful. It was Mary. On Thursday, my town day, I would visit Mary after prayer group met here at our church. Watching my friend transition was a lesson in life. When I'd ask her how she was doing, she didn't complain about her health issues. She'd say, "Oh, I'm just fine. Tell me what's going on at church. Tell me about you." Mary told story after story, pausing at the right moment and always carried through to the punchline with perfect timing. She talked of Kathleen and Charlie and Tevis and Francie and the grands and the great-grands. She wasn't bragging. She wanted to tell, and I wanted to listen. Kathleen made sure Mary was showered. Her naturally curly hair was fluffed. Her nails were manicured. We talked and we laughed. We ate Kathleen's chili. Each time I would leave, I'd look deeply into her blue eyes. I'd hold her hand. I'd say, "I love you, Mary." Today, as we part, I can't look into her eyes. but I can look deeply into her heart, into her soul. And we can all say, I love you, Mary.
We're going to wing it. So, as it turns out, my grandma was much older than me for almost all of my life. And so she would ask me questions rhetorically like, did you know that Humphrey Bogart's third wife, which, by the way, she had 4 wives, she would tell me with some sense of disapproval, he had 4 wives. Did you know that his third wife was the direct descendant of the 12th president, Zachary Taylor? To which I would say, no, I didn't know that, Grandma. And she would say, ha, of course. And that was pretty much my relationship with my grandma. And that's how I'll remember her, a woman of history, art, and culture. But there was always one thing that we could relate on, which was our interest in our family history. And as I look in front of me here, it's not hard to tell that our Scotch-Irish history was of some significance to our family. My brother's middle name, Ivern, my cousin Abe's red hair, my cousin William Chain Wallace, named after the Scottish freedom fighter William Wallace, and the Chain Scottish family name. It was of some significance to us. And that's one of the things I'll know about my grandma as well. And one day when I get the chance to visit Scotland and Ireland, I know that she'll be looking down on me with finally some sense of approval. So I love you, Grandma, and rest in peace, Grand Mary. Thank you.
My grandmother, Mary, was cultured, yet tough. She could speak endlessly on French cuisine, and in the same breath, yank out your childhood teeth before you can say, ah. When I last saw her, I was pleased to report that I had finally watched her movie recommendation, the 1973 political thriller, The Day of the Jackal. When I watched something she recommended, I was rewarded with all her associated memories, where, when, and with whom she first watched it. All delivered with such specificity you'd think it was a memory from last year. She spoke of her childhood with crystal clear lucidity deep into her 9th decade. It was a pleasure to let her indulge in her bottomless bank of anecdotes and charming memories. To quote the Roman Stoic Seneca, life, if well lived, is long enough. By my grandmother's example, I've seen a long life lived well.
A life well lived. A life well lived is a precious gift of hope and strength and grace from someone who has made our world a brighter, better place. It's filled with moments, sweet and sad, with smiles and sometimes tears, with friendships formed and good times shared, and laughter through the years. A life well lived is a legacy of joy and pride and pleasure, a living, lasting memory our grateful hearts will treasure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Mahar. It's a privilege for me to be able to share these thoughts in celebration of our mother's life. Celebration of life has become a phrase that's familiar and well-worn, but in this case, for a woman who led a life so well-lived, who might just have been the matron saint of celebration, there is no taking celebration for granted. So let there be bagpipes and brass and food and Whitey's ice cream. And I just want to let you know that there will be a lunch break in the middle of the eulogy, and then we'll reconvene because we have so much material to cover. All right, so let's begin by taking note of being here at the First Congregational Church of Moline. Mary has now hit for the cycle here. Baptized, confirmed, married, and memorialized. All here in this very sanctuary. In our highly mobile world, that really stands out as unique consistency. And for our whole family, this church has been the center of our centrifugal force. If you think that is good, we Mahars have 4 generations, including both mom and dad, at Garfield Elementary. Now, just as a side, I'm something of a Lincoln-phile. I'm a great admirer of Abraham Lincoln. And at times I've thought about, like, where did this admiration for Lincoln come from? And, you know, I grew up in Illinois. My mother gave me a love of history, but 2 months ago, sitting in this pew right over here for Phil Helene's service, I noticed that right on the pulpit, the wood carving in front facing the congregation is Abraham Lincoln. Of course I'm a Lincoln-phile. I grew up worshiping him. So I feel compelled to recite a little chronology. Both of her parents grew up on farms outside of Council Bluffs, Iowa. Her dad played on the 1907 state championship football team. Her maternal grandmother was born in Ireland and immigrated with her family as a child. Mary was born in Moline, attended the villa at age 4. Not only could she recall every detail about the villa, but she would tell you every detail about attending the villa. Garfield, of course, a stint in Wilmette, which she milked endlessly. Back to Moline, Knox, where she was a very proud Pi Phi, then married, a short newlywed stint in upstate New York, back to Moline for 67 and a half great years and 6 difficult last months. Not to dwell on the 6 difficult months, but our family wants to express our gratitude to our caregivers, especially Noka, Carol, and Rebecca, and Yukari, and Penny, and all the others that did so much in the cause of her care. And to our sister Kathleen, who shared a roof in the duplex, thank you for all that you did in carrying the larger load that came with living across the hall. Now on to the fun stuff and the deeper meaning and purpose in her life. There's a new book out by Robert Waldinger titled The Good Life, in which he shares insights from 9 decades of longitudinal research into the lives of Harvard graduates and Boston natives. He writes about the profound insight that the most meaningful aspect for fulfillment and a life well lived is having and curating great relationships. Our mother lived in abundance in great relationships. As a daughter, a wife, a mother, and a friend, as a mother-in-law, as a grandparent, as a great-grandparent, her example of living in abundance in relationships shines with its fullness and energy and zest. She knew the great truth that love is the horse and happiness is the cart. Okay, let's admit it. She could also be quite a stickler. Even as 4-year-olds, to rein us in, each of us would hear her say, "You are being obstreperous." Never did a container, a milk carton, a cereal box, a Pepsi bottle disgrace our kitchen table. There was always a pitcher or glass, whatever was the appropriate vessel. Once at the age of 10, I reported that I was at Turnstile and that a nice lady that I did not recognize came over and said, "Hello, Charlie." My mother said, in that situation, I should have said, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid you have the advantage." Just like all the other 10-year-olds at Turnstile. When she was a child, her sister Kathy took piano lessons and was a gifted player, right? And the whole family was blessed by Kathy's musical abilities. Mary, not having that skill, was sent to elocution lessons and thereafter spoke with vivid clarity. When her parents entertained, it was standard for Kathy to play piano for the entertainment and for Mary to recite poetry from memory. To this day, I strive to get my goods and wells correct and have to confess to being a recruit in the grammar police. I want to spend a minute on three themes that stood out in her life: learning and curiosity, creativity, and hospitality. She embodied being a lifelong learner. Every week, she went to the library as kids. We went with her, and she would check out an armload of books and read them all, staying up into the wee hours every night. And she had an exhaustive knowledge of just about everything. When we went on a family trip to Florida, her extensive preparation and homework meant that we stayed in Brandenburg, Kentucky, along the way at the Doe Run Inn, which Thomas Lincoln helped to construct. And on the return trip, we stopped in Cincinnati to try Skyline Chili, and to this day, Cincinnati chili is a family favorite. Everywhere we went, it was like she had been there before, and she loved both the journey and the destination. After meeting someone for the first time, she would end up knowing more about them than an accomplished biographer might have learned about her subject. In my last visit, I was sitting next to the bed, and she was lying there soundly asleep, and she sat bolt upright. She stared at me. She said, "Have you read Out of Africa?" And then before I could respond, she laid back down and was asleep again. I saw the movie. This led to attending historic events and seeing the sights. She and our dad were in Tampico, Illinois for day one of the Reagan campaign. She could quote rhymes from the Alf Landon campaign, which was 1936. She took Kathleen and I to Herbert Hoover's funeral, where she pointed out Harry and Ike arriving in a helicopter. She took the four of us in our summer T-shirts and cutoffs to the Palm Court in the Plaza Hotel in New York, and we heard the string quartet play while we drank lemonade. She strove to make the most out of every occasion. Creativity. She painted, and well. She was a flower arranging artist. She decorated. Our Christmas cards were all originals every year. She made books and fairy tale pictures featuring her own grandchildren. She wrote a memoir entitled A Mary, M-A-R-Y, Life. She made jewelry. Her postcards were acts of creativity. Life was her blank canvas, and she never painted by the numbers. Now, I didn't remember that this painting was going to be in the front of the church, so I didn't reference it in the 91 pages of my eulogy. But I can't help but tell the story about this painting. So for those of you who can't see it, come on up and look at it after the service is over. It's a picture of our mom standing on a bluff overlooking the Irish Sea in southeast Ireland. And in 1984, because Dad was president of Rotary, they went to the International Rotary meeting in England, and then being next door to Ireland, they couldn't help but drop over for a visit in Ireland. They stayed at this fantastic bed and breakfast, and there was just one other couple that were guests at the bed and breakfast, so they ended up having before dinner drinks, and then dinner, and then a nightcap, and the next morning having breakfast with this other couple, and they got to be very friendly, as they did with almost everyone they met under similar circumstances. And at one point in the conversation, my dad said, "Bob, what business are you in?" And he said, "Well, I'm in the music business." And my dad thought to himself, "Oh, that poor guy. They're all broke. You have to go through treatment. It's a hard life being in the music business." And so they had this wonderful visit, and they parted the best of friends. And when they got home, my dad asked France, "Hey, have you ever heard of Bob Plant?" And Francie said, "Do you mean Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin?" "Yeah, Bob." So we went back and checked, and he made $40 million that year. So that painting is from that bed and breakfast when they met Bob and his girlfriend at so the last one, hospitality. So she loved to entertain and entertained well, and I imagine that most of you here today have a Mary story regarding something special about an event that she hosted. Michael, I love that you, without any coordination, you used the word saint, I used the word saint. A little different context. You know, you talked about the way that she entertained in her home. One year, she was the appointed hostess for an event when Martha Stewart came to town to give a talk, and she chauffeured Martha around, and they spent the entire day together, and we're pretty sure that Martha learned quite a bit about how to entertain that day. She exemplified resilience. Her father, Bill Chain, died prematurely when she was but 14. It was awful for all of them, and in a kind of frozen in time experience, she often referred to him as Daddy. But they all bounced back and never talked bitterly about that which they could not control. The presence of the Chain influence can be found in this sanctuary today. I am Charles Chain Mahar. Our son Sandy is Alexander Chain. Tevis and Jay's son Will is William Chain. And let's not forget Anna Claire, named for our mother's mother, right? And Claire Wallace, who I think is in Guatemala today, live streaming. So, buenos dias. Another example of her resilience was how she adjusted to losing her sight to macular degeneration. Of course, it was difficult not to be able to drive or to lose her beloved reading. And here's a little shout out to the state of Illinois for providing audiobooks for the blind. We are pretty sure that she heard everything in their collection. But she adjusted magnificently. You never heard her complain about losing her sight. One of my most poignant memories of her losing her sight, and let's say she lost 96% of her sight, is that a year ago she came to St. Paul for a visit, and we're at a red light, and I'm talking, I'm absorbed in the conversation, and she said, "The light's green." 96%. "20 years of living as a widow was hard for her. She and our dad were a unique complement to each other, but she led and lived by example by making the best of it." I have 3 more themes before the other 44 themes. So my next 3 are friends, community, and family. There are too many stories to tell when it comes to friendship. Bridge group, gourmet, little traveler outings, driving to New York in Judy Jones's convertible, Knox friends, and Pi Phi alums. I know this is a variation on the theme of relationships, but she and our dad lived large in friendships. There's a favorite story of mine. Terry and I are newlyweds, and we're in Moline for Christmas. And we walk in about midnight from being out, and there's this blaring music coming from the living room. And Mom and Dad and Phil and Sharon Robinson are standing next to the stereo, and they have Handel's Messiah on at full volume, and they are totally absorbed in singing the Alleluia chorus. And we stood there for a minute before any one of them was aware that we were there, just completely immersed in the song, with PD conducting the whole time. Right? That's such a vision of how she and how they lived. Her community involvement spanned from this church to the YMCA board to the library board. She was a stalwart for the garden club and PEO. Both of our parents bled maroon and white for Moline. She was a generation ahead of her time for professional women in the workplace. When she was in the hospital last summer, she and I had the talk about what she wanted in her memorial service. Her very first immediate response was that we should focus on how very important her family is to her. So to Terry, Megan, Winston, Anna, Sandy, Kathleen, Tom and Peter, Tevis, Jimmy, Claire, and Will, and of course you as well, Jay, France, Mike, Abe, Maggie, and the spirits of Cork and Joe, this I love you comes to you from her heart. 3 short housekeeping items. After the service, please join us downstairs for lunch. We are not going to have a formal receiving line, and we look forward to connecting with all of you. Our sister Tevis prepared a different kind of eulogy. She did a tremendous job. She made a video as a tribute to Mary's life. It'll be running downstairs. I'm pretty sure it will be accessible on YouTube after that. Make sure that you see it. Find the link on YouTube. It's spectacular. Thank you for that, Tevis. In the same discussion about her service, I shared this story with her. And she said, you have to tell that story at my funeral, and then we'll act on it. So in the summer of 2003, I was lucky enough to be part of a group that went to Scotland to play golf in a week-long match with a team of Scottish and Irish golfers. On the Sunday morning of that trip, the Scots took us to church with them for a proper Church of Scotland service. It came time to sing a hymn, and I was sharing a hymnal with my great friend Jerry Stenson. For reasons I could not comprehend, singing the hymn, I burst into tears. Jerry gave me a "are you all right" look, and I had nothing but confusion for him. Then I realized this hymn was part of my dad's funeral service the summer before, and my subconscious made the connection before I did, hence the tears. So Mary's request had 2 parts. 1, that I share that story, and 2, that we sing this hymn, and man, are we going to sing this hymn. When we get to the chorus, hold nothing back. Let them hear us from the Mississippi to the Rock. Belt it out for Mom. We all want to honor Mary's legacy, and we can all do so by following her example of living out a lifetime of learning and curiosity, creativity, hospitality, friendship, community, resilience, family, and love.